On the internet, JSON files are used pretty extensively for data storage. And Python includes a module for JSON code. In fact, all you have to do to use the methods is import JSON. So a little background on JSON. That JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. It is used to store and exchange data on the web. A lot of companies share data that developers can access through APIs. And the data is either in a JSON file or an XML file. And more companies are using JSON. The advantage of using JSON files is they are compatible with all sorts of different programming languages. JSON files consist of name-value pairs, and they are very similar to the dictionary data type in Python. A name-value pair includes a field name in double quotes, followed by a colon and a value. JSON values can be, you can store numbers, strings, booleans, arrays, objects, or null. And to create it, you use curly braces, and then inside you give it those name value pairs. So that looks almost identical to Python's dictionary syntax. So in Python, we can actually use a dictionary object to store JSON data. And Python has built-in methods that let us write to JSON files and read from JSON files. And so that's what we are going to be learning how to use. Writing to a JSON file. You can use the dump method to write serialized objects as JSON formatted data. Now, there is also a version called dumps with an S. And that's only used to encode a Python object into a JSON formatted display string. It's not used to write files. So I don't know why they decided to make these methods similar, but they did. So JSON dump writes Python serialized objects as JSON formatted data, but JSON dumps with the S encodes any Python object into a JSON formatted string. So to write a file, we need json.dump. Okay, so the syntax is json.dump. We have our Python object. We have a file name. Those two things are required. And then you can specify indentation and whether you want the keys sorted. And the keys are the name portion of the name value pair. Indenting actually will make your JSON file easier to read. Okay, it kind of puts it into a more human readable format, but indent and sort keys are optional. So what I did was I took a little, basically a dictionary object, and I created several different Python files, and I used the different options. So you could see what the file looks like with these different options. That will let you know, how you want to create your own. And you can see in this dictionary object, I have numbers, I have values that are strings, I also have a value that is a list. Okay, and so I think I'm going to open those files so you can actually see what they look like. And let's see, I'm going to find them. All right, so JSON files are text files, so you can open them and view them, which is actually nice. So this first one, json.dump, what it's writing is the student dictionary. And the file object that I created when I opened, okay, was write file. And that's all I'm giving it. Okay, so I've got with open. This is the file that I'm creating. My file object, I am writing my student dictionary object to the file. And then I just print out a message that, it's done writing the file. So how does this look? So the name of the file I wrote is student no indent. And so here it is. And that is what it looks like. Okay, and as you can see, it's straight across, very horizontal, no indentation, not the most user-friendly format to view. The next one I did, I called student indent 4 because I am writing student to the file, but for the optional parameters, I'm sending it an indent of 4. And this is how it looks. Way more user-friendly, right? This is very similar to the dictionary object format. Okay? We just don't have a variable name at the beginning. So very user-friendly. Then the next one that I do, I am using an indent of 0, just so you can see the difference between using an indent of 4 versus an indent of 0. So here is my indent 0 file. Okay, still user-friendly. And this is where it kind of comes into personal preference. I prefer indent 4 over indent 0. Okay, but you guys have to decide, how do you want it to look? The last one that I did, in addition to setting indent 4, because I like that indent, I also turned on sort keys. So what it's going to do is it's going to sort the name portion of the name value pair. And so here is my indent 4 with sort. And you can see that it has indeed sorted. And you can also see that I added something to it, but that was in code later on. So what I did was I took those outputs that I just showed you and I added them here so you can compare them, because you have to decide what options you want to turn on. So that's creating your JSON file, json.dump. Once it's created, you can actually read from it, and that's json.load. So here, I still have to import JSON. I'm specifying what the name of my file is, and you all know I like the one with the indent 4 and the sorting. So that is the file that I'm opening, and my file object is called read file. And so I am using json.load to read in my file object, and I'm storing it in student. Okay, and so what it's going to do is it's going to read in the object as a dictionary object stored in student. Then I can use the for in to print out the key value pairs. And so this is what I get. Okay, so once you read that in and it's a dictionary object, you can just process it like any other dictionary object. What if I want to add an entry to an existing JSON file? Well, you may think, well, why can't I just open the file for appending and append the data? Well, what Python does, let's say what I want is I want GPA added to the key value pairs. If you open for append, well, it thinks that it needs to create basically a brand new entry. It doesn't add it to the existing one. It tries to throw a new one at the bottom. Well, that's not what we wanted. So there is a way to add a new dictionary item to an existing JSON file, but we have to use a few more methods. Now, I should add that if what you want is to create a completely new student, then append works fine. But in this case, that's not what we want to do. So if we want to add a name value pair to an existing JSON file, then we have to use the update method because that will let us add a new key value pair. So we have to take our dictionary object, use the update method, and send it our new dictionary entry. To open the file, we are going to use R+ because that is a read and write mode. And so the procedure is to read from the file, and then we're going to add our dictionary entry. So I'm going to set up the new key and the new value. So I've got what do you want to add to the student file? In this case, I'm adding GPA. What value is associated with the GPA? 4.0, of course. And then I kind of format that new dictionary entry. So I've got the new key, GPA, colon, new value 4.0. And so you can see I'm formatting this in the curly braces. Then I'm specifying the name of my file. And then you can see I'm using with open. I've got my file name. I'm opening it R+, and I'm calling the file object add file. So then I am going to load the JSON file, storing it in Student Dictionary. And so Student Dictionary at this point has all of this in it. Okay, and then I am using update to add in my new dictionary entry, which I formatted right here. So to actually update our file, we do need to use JSON dump. And when we read from the file, what happens is the file pointer moves to the end. So before we can write to the file, we need to move that file pointer back to the beginning, and that is what the seek method does. So in our little example, after we open our file for reading and writing, and we read it in using json.load, read it into our dictionary object. We update that dictionary object. What we need to do is reposition that file pointer using our file object and seek. And then we can use json.dump to write our updated dictionary to file. And that is what Seek and JSON dump are doing here. And so what I've done in this example is I've actually created a little function. Probably should have called it add to dictionary instead of append, but I named it append. Even though we are not opening our file for append, we are reading and writing. But you can see that we've specified the file that we're going to open. We're opening it for reading and writing. We got our file object. We are reading the file, storing the contents in a dictionary object, updating that dictionary object with our formatted entry that we got down here. Here's where we formatted it. And then we're repositioning the pointer, writing to file. Okay, and this is what our new dictionary that was written to file looks like. So typically in a program, not only do you want to be able to add to the file, you also want to be able to read from the file and print. And maybe all you want to do is read from the file. So in this example, I have two functions. One is just designed to read from the file and display the data. The other one is designed to add to the file. And so here is the program processing it. So we do add to the file. We ask them for whatever they want to add to the student file. We're going to make that the key. We ask them for a value, format the entry, call the append function, which adds it, and then we call the read function, which handles opening the file. And if the file isn't there, it does display an error message. If the file is there, we are printing the key value pairs. Okay, and so that's the processing. And typically, if you're doing file handling, that's not the only thing that you're doing in the program. So an example from the book uses greet user, which has usernames. And so there's a function to greet the user. And you can see that we're retrieving a stored username there. Get stored username is file handling. So we are opening username.json. And if it can't open the file, if it can't find it, it returns none. Otherwise, it returns the username. Okay, so it's returning it to the point it was called from. If there is a username, we say welcome back username. And if there's not, then we get them a username. So we call get new username because we're assuming that if the username's not there, they don't have one. So we prompt them to enter their username and we actually create the file. Okay, so that's what the different functions are doing. And all we have to do in this program is call greet user. Everything starts here. So this is where it is checking to see if the username is there. If it is there, awesome. If it's not, then we create one. So that's actually a pretty simple example. Here's a more complicated example from a program that should look somewhat familiar. This is the rivers example. So I start with the 3 in my dictionary, and then here I'm adding one, just in case you're curious how that would look, and that's manually. And then I'm calling a menu function. So this is kind of, I'm initializing things here. Then I'm calling a menu function. So in this is the top of the program. You can see that I'm importing JSON. I've got a menu where they can create a file, read from a file, or add to a file, or quit. Okay, so I read in their selection, make sure it's one of the options, and then I return it. So if they choose to create the file, okay, that means their choice is a 1, and I call a create function and I pass it the Rivers dictionary, because that is, what the initial values in the file are going to be. So here's the create function. We're pulling in the object, which happens to be the Rivers dictionary. And I'm letting them know that if the file exists, they're going to overwrite it. And if they choose to continue, I'm opening the file for writing. And I'm using json.dump to create it. And then I'm displaying a little message that, hey, your file's been created. And once I do that, it's going to return here and display the menu again. And so let's say they choose option 2 to read. So here is the read function. And I've got some of the try and accept handling here. So it's trying to open rivers.json. If it can't open or if it can't read, then I've got exception handling here. Why wouldn't it be able to find the file? Well, if they didn't create the file, it's impossible to read from it. So they have to create it first. Anyway, assuming the file is there, we actually read it and load up our River dictionary. And then we come down to else. So the reason they would be reading the file is to print. So they have several different print options. So it is displaying a print menu. And the print menu has the different print options, which should look familiar to you guys. And so each one of these little options is a separate function. So for one, if they end up choosing that, we're calling print all and we're sending it our River dictionary. If they choose 2, we're printing out the keys and we're sending it the River dictionary. And if they choose option 3, we're printing the value and sending it the River dictionary. So we have a print all function, we have a print key, and a print value. These should all look really familiar. The only difference is I put them into functions. Okay, so the whole purpose of read is to read in the data and print it, and they have choices. Okay, so after they do that, the menu gets displayed, and let's say they want to add. Okay, so that is our option 3. So you'll notice that we are calling get key, which is going to prompt them. We're calling get value, and then we're creating our new dictionary entry. We're taking that new entry and we're calling append. So let's go look at those functions. So here we have get key, get value, and append. So get key, enter the name of the river, because that is our key, right? So we return it. Get value. Does the river flow through multiple countries? If it does, then we need a list. If it does not, then we just ask them for the one country it's in, and we return country. If it needs the list, we create the empty list, and we end up getting into a loop where we are asking them for the country and we're appending it to our list, okay, until they quit. And if they end up in this little section, when we return country, we're actually returning a list. Okay, and remember, it comes back up here and formats that object. So new country is either going to be one country or it's going to be a list. It can be either one. Okay, and at this point, it calls append, which opens our file for reading and writing. And this logic should look very familiar to you because we are reading from the file, we're loading it into our dictionary, we're updating with the new item, we're repositioning the file pointer, and now we are writing to the file. So to see this full example, here is the example with all of the functions on top. And then this is where the main program starts. And I did put this in one file just for simplicity's sake for showing you guys, but in reality, obviously those functions would be in separate files and I would have to import them. To help you guys out with Hands-on 4, I also created another example showing you how to do file handling for a favorite number, which also should look super familiar to you, right? So we have a favorite number dictionary, and then we get into displaying a menu, checking the choices. It's very similar to what you guys just saw with the rivers example. The difference is we're using favorite number. Okay, and because this is very similar to what you need to do in the hands-on video, I will go through this in more detail.